the early days of the digital revolution, engineer Lee Felsenstein helped organize the Homebrew Computer Club. The club was one of the first serious organizations for hobbyists, designers, and inventors who wished to learn about the early personal computers.
This myth has developed that the hippies made the personal computer with the Homebrew Computer Club. No, there were hippies there, a few. There were some psychedelic rangers. There were more doctors, physicians who should have been engineers. There was, as I put it in the book, the usual batch of dweebs and slobs that populated Silicon Valley. There were the guys with white shoes who said, you could make money on this. And everybody said, well, okay, well, maybe show us, but, it was quite a mixture of people.
Hey, welcome everybody to the Plutopia News Network podcast. I'm John Lebkowski, and my co-hosts today are Scoop Sweeney, my partner in crime, and Wendy Grossman, our constant companion. And our guest today is Lee Felsenstein, who is a computer engineer who played a central role in the development of personal computers back a long time ago, in the 60s, 1960s. He was an instigator of the Homebrew Computer Club and a designer of, was it the Osborne One?
Yes.
And that was the first mass-produced portable computer, as I recall.
I'd say the first successful one. There were a few others that were like $8,000, but that was $17.95.
Yeah, what was the thing? I heard you in a conversation with some of the homebrew guys via YouTube, and there was something about a magazine cover that everybody saw that sort of excited their imaginations.
Well, it was the article announcing the availability of the Altair 8800 computer kit, which definitely raised a tremendous amount of interest and orders for the kit. But actually, in 1973, that was in 1975, January issue of 1975 of Popular Electronics. But in September of 1973, another similar magazine, Radio Electronics, printed an article showing the TV typewriter, which, as its name implies, was a keyboard which would allow you to type and enter characters on your home TV. And that they expected that they would get about 20 people who wanted to build it. So they didn't print the construction plans, which were fairly extensive. But they offered them for $2 plus a self-addressed stamped envelope. They got 10,000 paid responses. And I consider that the opening shot of the home computer or the personal computer revolution. It certainly alerted me to the idea that something was out there and ready to go.
And you were, well, at the time, you were like a Berkeley radical, right?
Well, okay, let's timeline a little bit more. I was definitely a Berkeley radical in 1964 through 69, I suppose. And that's covered in the book. This is the book I'm flogging at the moment, and my first book, Me and My Big Ideas, Counterculture, Social Media, and the Future. It all starts there for me because I participated in a revolution. I explain why. It's a small revolution, but it did overthrow the existing order of in loco parentis in the relationship of the university administration to its students. And from that, the counterculture blossomed. And I saw that and I participated in it. I began writing. But what I observed was that the student body became a community in the process. And I was able to observe how that happened. And I was watching from the perspective of an engineer saying, well, now what technologically can I do that will facilitate this kind of process? I didn't really understand the process until afterwards when it was analyzed and I heard it. But of course, then there's always the next one. All old revolutionaries are waiting for the next revolution or working towards it. So I went in search of what technology of media I could push forward that would make this kind of community formation the norm. And that's really what I've been doing for many years after that. So I had to drop out of college because I went into depression. Couldn't, do any homework and so forth, so flunked everything. So I went to work as what they call a junior engineer, an engineer without a degree, at a big electronics place, Ampex, which is hardly existent at all today, but back then it owned magnetic tape. And I found myself in probably the best place I could possibly be, which was the special products division. Doesn't sound like much, but it's a tiny division that had to build anything. And as I found out many decades later, they were the spook shop for Ampex. The major client was the government, although I didn't work on any of the government stuff. I don't think anything was happening there. I worked on other stuff. So I learned the craft of engineering as it worked within the structure of manufacturing and so forth, the whole soup to nuts part of product creation. And after 2 years of analog and a time dropping out to work on the underground press and running out of money, I came back and they had a digital project. Now, I had been avoiding digital since high school, since 1959, when my brother started a computer club there and grabbed me and says, "You do hardware here. You can build this stuff that's in these 1940s books." Well, I tried, but I decided from that digital was too messy, too finicky. One little bit wrong, and the whole thing blows up. So I stuck with analog for 10 years, but I couldn't stick any more of it because it was that or leave the job. And so I was introduced to digital, and really that year, for reasons that are explained in the book, I finally realized that the technology I've been looking for was a network of computers. And then I sat upright and said, where am I going to get a computer, let alone a network? But the universe began organizing in that direction for me. And within a year, I was part of a group that had, in fact, secured the donation not only of a computer, or not only a mainframe time-sharing computer, but the very same one that the fabled Doug Engelbart had used for his mother of all demos, if anybody knows about that. We didn't know that at the time, but we certainly had a lot of help from people in that axis, in the Menlo Park SRI, Stanford, Xerox PARC kind of agglomeration that John Markoff is so fond of writing about, and justifiably so. Well, okay, so I moved from being a Berkeley radical to being a Silicon Valley engineer, junior, to being immersed in the very primordial personal computer underground. You were having potlucks every week at the Community Computer Center, which is this little, I call it the People's Pachinko Parlor, little storefront with teletypes and time-sharing access the kids could use for 50 cents an hour. Now, these are mostly kids of those researchers at all those institutions. And there was a little newspaper, People's Computer Company, that tied everything together. I wrote some stuff for that, and that was the place where the personal computer developed from. put it that way. Now, you can say, okay, but it first showed up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. That stuff's going to happen. But Silicon Valley was there for it. I'm starting to get froggies here.
This seems sort of like a very typical thing that when there's a really great idea, it's often not one person that has the idea, in isolation, but everybody's sort of having the idea. I mean, this is like, I think the idea here that I'm seeing is kind of like bringing fire from the gods to ordinary humans, bringing the computer from corporate government use to household use.
And that's what I say in the book, quite literally. And it's been said many times before. The concepts don't pay attention to walls. And they float around, they diffuse, they get around. And so certainly in Albuquerque, this little company was going broke making calculator kits when calculator prices dropped. And it was a move of desperation on their part. And because they did desperation engineering, I'll put it that way, it became something that, yes, you could get a computer from them, for a kit for a computer, but you would find out soon enough what a fool you were to think they were going to just take it out of the box, put a few things together and run. No, it was a long process, and the process involved learning, and that involved getting in touch with other people who had those missing pieces of information. And in effect, they kind of built the Homebrew Computer Club into the box. And so you needed it when you got the box open. I suppose it's like a Pandora's box. And that was, I think, quite fortunate. If IBM had come out with it, well, they did come out with a personal computer in 1975, but they called it the portable computer. And it was one of those super calculator things. HP had done one previously, a single row of red LED, alphanumerics, and keyboard with APL characters on it, which are incomprehensible in addition to the regular letters and numbers. And I recall that could be first or second computer fair. They had a booth there. IBM was going to sell this to the personal computer market. Nobody showed up at the booth. They were all at the next booth over, waving money at a freak who was selling a little database, primordial database program called What's It. And anyway, if the rest of that hadn't been there, if it had just been IBM, first of all, the price would have been out of range in the $10,000 region, and would not have attracted anyone but a few, people in the business world. Okay, so
well, I recall hearing that you were pretty entertaining in leading the Homebrew Computer Club meetings. How did that go? I mean, what was it like running those meetings?
It was always quite interesting because, of course, I never knew what I was going to say. And the point is, I got the people in the audience to say what they had to say. My job was to prevent them from going into great detail. I need to explain here. In 1973, the reason why I was investigating, well, the reason why I saw that article, I was investigating terminals, because we had set up a computer bulletin board system in public. So this was the first public access computer social media, community memory. So it was a success. I like to say, and it's the epigraph of the book, we opened the door to cyberspace and found that it was hospitable territory. We didn't even hardly expect that. I expected a little more than the guy who actually came up with the idea. He thought there'd only be 3 categories: jobs, cars, and housing. And it exploded because we didn't limit the categories. You could create a category just by entering a keyword. So we had this, I'd say, roaringly successful social media system. It was not structured to make money. It was structured to see if people would use it and how they would use it. And so we'd had 2 years of that under our belt. And I'd learned a lot from that, namely about levels of information. Pardon me. I learned a lot from that, mainly about levels of information, like the primary information is what I'm trying to communicate right now. The secondary information is how you, the listener, got to hear it, where you had to go to find out about it, or to listen to it. And of course, there's probably other levels about how you got to that level. And when the Homebrew Club started in someone's garage with 30 attendees looking at the first Altair computer to arrive in the Bay Area, I said, let's pass around a sheet so everybody gives their name, their contact information. That's the key to it. And some small amount about what they're doing, what they want to do, what they have, what they need. And we all did that. And it became the first newsletter. But that was social media in its own right. Of course, it had to be there where the people were, but it was on paper. And I took that approach. And after the fourth meeting, when the fellow who owned the garage, who by that time was giving lectures in little small auditoriums to all of us newcomers, teaching us the IBM way of programming, half the audience was leaving and going out in the lobby to meet each other. And I said, that's the process we got to bring into the room. I had the chance to do that. And so that was what I from 1975 to 86. I called myself the Toastmaster because we were specifically not becoming a formal organization with dues and elections and officers and committees and politics. Southern California did that and it destroyed itself. We just had this meeting.
Yeah, I often wonder about how, I mean, you have gatherings of people, the Well is a classic example of a place where people show up and hang out. And to me, it always seemed like it would be, there's a level of difficulty in getting from a community of people who are hanging out together and spending time together and building history together and getting to something that is actually productive, that actually delivers something like a computer, or like, I don't know, a movement, whatever. What are your thoughts about organizing people in that sort of virtual context?
Well, we found by polling 23 businesses that had formed out of the first few years of the Homebrew Computer Club. The point was to get the people with the needs together with the people with the resources, and vice versa. Each needs each other. And if there's the prospect for it, they go into business. And they're tiny little businesses, as Apple was in the Homebrew Club. It was Steve Wozniak sitting there at every meeting, working on his code and his hardware with a couple of high school kids he brought with him, Chris Espinosa and I'm thinking of not quite making the name right, but Chris Espinosa and Randy Wigginton. I think Espinosa only ever had one job in his life. That was at Apple. The company grew up around him and so forth. So we were selling things to each other because we needed them. I had co-rented a garage in Berkeley with Bob Marsh, who founded Processor Technology. That from that magazine cover, he looked in the article, he said, well, wait, there's nothing in that box. they're going to need all sorts of cards to plug in to do various things. I can do that. And he had a partner, and he formed a company, and off they went, and I helped them. I contracted to them. So there's a case where, perhaps half the people who are in that company have been at homebrew club meetings at one time or another. So it's a little tiny incestuous community that grows and grows if there's growth to be had. It's not like you have to sit down and say from a central standpoint, now we're going to plot out this industry, and here's, you'll take this portion, you'll take that, and so forth. It doesn't work that way at all. It's chaos.
More organic, yeah. I recall Markov suggesting that some of the people who were involved in this initial development of what became the personal computer were also using psychedelics. Did psychedelics have any influence or impact on the ideas that people were having, the way that they were thinking about the development of the technologies they were into?
A small amount. This myth has developed that the hippies made the personal computer with the homebrew computer club. No, there were hippies there, a few. There were some psychedelic rangers. There were more doctors, physicians who should have been engineers. There was, as I put it in the book, the usual batch of dweebs and slobs that populated Silicon Valley. There were the guys with white shoes who said, you could make money on this. And everybody said, well, okay, well, maybe show us. But, it was quite a mixture of people. And there was a tremendous turnover. The room held 274 people. Our first, 2 years. In 1977, we handed out the sheet of list of attendees, their mailing list. And it wasn't the attendees, just the mailing list. And it was like 350 names long, right? In 1978, we unrolled a whole roll of teletype paper across the front of the auditorium with all the names of the mailing list on it. That was 3,500 names. And so you can see that you couldn't fit anywhere more than like 7% of them in that room. And in 1996, I happened to be at the offices of Kleiner Perkins, which was the premier venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. I was attending a book party. I didn't work there or anything. And a little man came up to me with owlish glasses, and it says, you don't know me. They all start that way, because you don't know me. I used to attend the Homebrew Computer Club meetings, and I got quite a bit out of it. I was an engineer at Intel at the time. And so we exchanged cards, and this was John Doerr, who was the top dog there at that venture capital company. And so when I picked my jaw off the floor, I gave him what I do. I gave him the blessing. I say, yes, we were, they come to me and they say, and you were saying some really important things, which of course I wasn't. I was preventing people from saying too much. And so I said, well, we were doing this and that and so forth. We were doing all the important things, you and me. So I gave him the blessing, exchanged the cards, and of course I failed utterly thereafter to penetrate his wall of assistance in order to try to capitalize on that. But that was a pretty interesting point. So who knows who passed through? There'd be the mailing list, but they may or may not be on it.
One thing I was wondering about, so I know that Wozniak was there at Homebrew, and some of the, or much of the development of the initial Apple computers was kind of happening along that time. But I also know that, when I first heard of personal computers, I was hearing of IBM PCs, right? So the IBM PC was kind of the big deal. Didn't hear as much about Apple until a little bit later. And I'm just wondering, was there any connection between the Homebrew Computer Club and what was happening at IBM that led to the creation of that personal computer that they built?
Well, certainly not directly. You can assume that that somebody from IBM got to the meeting eventually, soon enough. But the mythology there was that they knew about Apple. They said, if those guys started in a garage, we have to start in a garage. In a nondescript building in Boca Raton, Florida, not in Armonk, New York. But aside from that, I don't think so. We've been very, very indirect.
What about people from Radio Shack? Because at that time, late 70s, the Radio Shack Model 1, Model 2, Model 3 were really important. I mean, I remember one of my friends, I think it was about 79 or 80, said, I've just bought a TRS-80 Model 3. And I said, well, can I have first refusal when you sell it? Because I knew he would upgrade in a year or two, which he did. So I got his in 1981. And a friend of mine did have the Osborne very early on.
Well, Radio Shack clearly was on the ball. They jumped in with both feet. They must have had somebody there nearly from the beginning, but I couldn't say because nobody took attendance.
In
Again,
retrospect, a mistake.
well, from an academic standpoint, a mistake, and academics could still go back and dig that stuff up, I suppose. But it's of little point. But it's of little importance to those who are frantically shoveling away at the front end. So exactly, the currents of how things went from place to place. Well, there's one very interesting story to tell there regarding the Osborne. There was a guy named Blair Newman. He was on the well. A very brilliant guy, probably schizophrenic. One of those guys who tosses off ideas and wants to implement all of them. At one point, when wireless began to appear, he called together a late night meeting of everybody he knew about to try to figure out how we can build him a portable computer, a wearable computer that he could walk through the world with the entire internet roaring through his skull. That's what he really wanted. We have it now, yes. And he was grandiose, and I thought he was on drugs, but who knows? But that was he, among many other things, which included the 5.25-inch hard disk drive, which he specified, spun off the idea of what became the Osborne. He was working with Trip Hawkins of 3DO as consultants, marketing consultants to Apple in would have been 78 or so. And he came up with the idea of, again, you'll see it in the Osborne 1, a 5-inch display, which IBM had created as a component for their portable computer. In other words, there were 3 companies that were supplying IBM with that. And then IBM in 1979 stopped producing it. 2 full-size floppy disk drives, Z80 computer CPM, and in a box that folded up. And they presented it to Steve Jobs, which of course he threw it out the window because it was CPM and they weren't doing CPM. They were doing 6502 Apple stuff. And the idea, the concept drifted around Silicon Valley. Now, Adam Osborne was a participant in a poker group, which included several future luminaries of the personal computer industry, Bill Godbout and George Morrow, and Chuck Peddle, who was the designer of the 6502 chip. And I talked to Peddle later, and he said, I asked him, is this group where Adam picked up this idea from? And he said it was around the industry at that time. Adam Osborne dragged me off the floor of the 1980 computer fair and said, I'm starting a hardware company and I really want to do it right. He had just sold his book company and the money was burning a hole in his pocket. And he saw this little design and nobody was taking up on it, and he did. So I wound up being the engineer to design that, and that was the Osborne 1. Again, pardon me. So designs sort of flow around. I guess this is where I can say that the idea that Silicon Valley is centralized is not true at all. Never was. The idea that there's this Mount Olympus and all them big names are sitting around a table on top and tossing off lightning bolts down to the valley below. Nonsense. Silicon Valley was always a field of molehills, each one a company. And where the action was between the molehills. In the bar and grills, they went to lunch, man, and went afterwards to drink beer and talk about, how terrible the boss was. That's where, first of all, the ferment happened, and multiple companies would, share a bar and grill. When one of the employees got fired and decided they were going to start their own company and show the boss, they could always go back, not to the company, they wouldn't be allowed in there. They could go back to the bar and grill, and they knew who they would meet there and talk about, this idea they've got, this company they want to build, and they could recruit there. And so they did. And that is what caused the churn among companies. That was Silicon Valley. So
isn't Silicon Valley centralized somewhat in terms of where the money comes from for all the startups? I mean, it seems to me there's not that many venture capitalists around.
there were a fair number of them, at least then. Maybe they're not fewer now, I would bet, but I haven't bothered with it. In fact, the venture capital companies, they kind of gradually raised off the surface of the earth and became inaccessible because their deals had to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yes, Warren Buffett talks about that beyond and below a certain point, buying a company won't move the needle at Berkshire Hathaway. So it has to be in the hundreds of millions at least, I would think, to be big enough for him to think about it. And I'm sure some of those venture capitalists, it's the same thing.
Exactly. And so the role was filled, I think, not completely by what's called angel investors, who are individuals. They'll deal in the 6 and 7 figures, whereas the venture capital companies have to deal in 8 and 9 figures. So in that regards, it's messy. All I can say. And
So
I haven't played in that field for a long time.
did Stuart Brand show up at the Homebrew Computer Club meetings?
I'm pretty sure he did. On the other hand, Stuart Brand was there before the beginning. The Whole Earth catalog was a social media concept because they drew upon their readership for their articles and reviews. I published an article in there on personal computers. It was in the 1975, I think, spring edition of Whole Earth Review. But I was talking about the pre-Altair world because that's when it was written. And the first Whole Earth catalog was 1968. So that idea of there being a lot of people out there who have a lot of knowledge about different things, bringing it together so you could all see it in one place, and working from there, basically building community around technology and community. You could credit that to him more than anything else.
Yeah, I'm thinking
So-
about, I was wondering what inspired the creation of the Whole Earth software review, Whole Earth software review that they published for a while.
Well, that started, I think, in 1982. I mean, the first one was
It was a
published.
bit later, yeah.
Well,
And a little before the well was created, right?
1985.
Yeah.
And that was very definitely on that direct line of development, because Stuart Brand asked me to participate in the planning for the first Hackers Conference, which was really the book party for Stephen Levy's book, Hackers, Heroes of the Computer Revolution. And I was in that. In fact, I helped in the interviews, I helped Levy develop the concept of the hacker ethic.
You once told me how many times you're mentioned in the index, but I've forgotten the number.
46.
There it is.
And some of them are stretches of text. It's like, you know, I don't know how I count that. I count that as one mention.
Isaac Asimov would have counted one for every page. That's how he got to 500 books.
Wait a minute. One book per page? No.
No. He counted every book in which he'd written anything at all as a book that he wrote. So that's how he got to 500. That's how he got
okay.
to claim that he'd written 500 books.
Well, unfortunately, I'm not in that ecosystem really, except I'm entering it now with this book. Where was it?
We were talking about the book launch
Yeah.
party for Stephen Levy's.
Oh,
Hackers.
yes. Okay. So that was a very interesting conference, because they got together everybody who was mentioned in the book whom they could find in the Bay Area, and we brainstormed for several sessions about who we should invite. And it was held over 3 days in a little retreat, and it's been videotaped, it's been documented. And that was it. It was a one-time event. And then after that, Stuart contacted me, and he wanted to talk about this idea of starting an online system to kind of continue the process. We had been using an online system called EIES, EIES, Electronic Information Exchange System, from New Jersey Institute of Technology. So we had been conferencing within that group. And so we got some experience in conferencing. And Stuart said, well, why don't we bring this out and make one for the whole Earth community? And I thought maybe not, but yeah, I'd give it a try. And so then next I was notified that I was a member of the WELL. In fact, it turns out I was the third one registered, which gave me a 3-letter username, Lee. First was SBB for Stuart Brand. Next was MMC for the guy who actually ran it, Mike McClure. And then there was me. And I don't think I've been sent a bill ever. So the WELL then went on an interesting trajectory. Somebody's got to study it, or at least tell the story of it. And
Yeah, they started on a VAX, right? They started on a VAX and then moved to a Sequent.
I think so. I don't really know which computers they were using. I wasn't involved in that level of it.
But it was mini computers. It wasn't really microcomputers.
We'll call them super microcomputers. That's
okay.
In fact, did the second and third, well, the second community memory system and third were done on super micros, because they took over from mini computers.
And that was a Unix system running Picospan.
Right.
Yeah.
And in 2012, I believe, the users bought it.
Yes. Well, not the users. I think it was a handful, 11 or 12 users bought it.
Some users, yes.
Yeah. And I believe isn't it hosted on Amazon Web Services now?
Probably.
I believe it is.
Yeah.
It makes it much cheaper to run.
Well, I'm planning the next community memory system, number 4, which will run on cell phones. I don't know quite where the servers are going to be, but they won't be very visible. Now, you could say that I've sold out to the mainframers, not really. But the point of it is, mobile phones have, or smartphones certainly, have solved the networking problem and the bookkeeping problem that otherwise was going to have to be solved. And, I would wish it otherwise, because my original concept was little neighborhood houses that people made their front room available to the community, local community, and they would have a computer terminal in there, among many other pieces of communication technology like copiers. The book talks about where that idea came from, but it's gone way, way beyond that. And so one way or the other, it's going to be on phones, and I'm pretty much planning on putting it there, but I'm working out a front end, a user interface that is what will distinguish it, as was modeled on the book and not the papyrus scroll.
Well, you
What do you-
mentioned working, selling out to the mainframers. I worked for the mainframers at Kaiser Permanente's IT group, and they were very derisive when I mentioned the personal computer revolution that I felt was happening, and they would say, "No, no, no, it'll never replace the mainframe." My first job was just pushing around big metal carts full of punch cards. In fact, I set the record for the biggest floor sort ever when I tipped over, probably 24 of those big tubs of punch cards. And I knew at that point that the time was limited for the rule of the mainframe, because they were still so embedded in the punch cards, having people punching in on little keyboards. And it took them a long time to enter the actual modern computer age. But what was the problem between the PC world and mainframers? What do you feel caused that? Was it just territorial integrity, I guess?
Well, we didn't rule them out. In fact, our founder was an IBM programmer. When he stood up, I guess, in front of the third meeting and announced that to instruct us in programming, and he said that exclusive OR is an asymmetric function. It has to be exclusive OR on something. To me, as an engineer, exclusive OR is 2 inputs, and if they're different, you get an output. It's highly symmetric. At that point, I figured, I'm walking out of here to the outside where people were meeting each other and talk with them. Anyway, the mainframe, call it theocracy, was essentially there because of the mainframes were there. They needed to be run. And the people running them wanted prestige and importance. So they styled themselves as computer professionals. And, don't just talk to us like we're technicians, we're professionals.
That
Job
pervaded all
security.
of IBM.
Hmm?
That pervaded all of IBM. I had a Selectric typewriter in the late 1970s and early 80s, and if to get it repaired, you would have to call IBM, and they would send a guy in a suit who would carefully take off his jacket and roll up his sleeves before he touched it. And I mean, it was hilarious. It was a typewriter.
Yeah, it's a typewriter repairman, right? But no, and that's an important point, because certainly that's how IBM retained so much control of their technology, was they imbued their workforce with self-importance, and they built most of their own components. Other people, mortal people, could not get a hold of them to build their own versions, but they went ahead and they built plug compatible stuff, got sued by IBM, and IBM lost the suit. but the computer professionals and the mini professionals around them weren't going to go tell outsiders how this stuff worked, because they would basically lose their value as people, as employable people. And so that was the big wall that IBM built around itself. And it was very effective at keeping everything in. And in a way, it ensured that the people on the outside really wouldn't care about them. So they could start building their silly little 8-bit computers and become 16-bit computers and so forth, and do those silly little things they were going to do with them. And finally, the level of what's going on outside the wall overtopped the wall. And today, as I understand it, IBM is a Linux programming shop. The open source, the communist software, and it's literally working according to Marx's original concept of the communism of the far future, where the level of technology has risen so high that there's no more want and need, and people get to do what they want to do, they love to do, and they do this thing in the morning and that in the afternoon and so forth. That's what's happening with open source programming, and it works. And in fact, it's survived IBM in a way. IBM is now using them, relying upon open source. And that's a very, to me, satisfying outcome.
It's kind of weird to me that IBM didn't make the PC proprietary, and it was so easily clonable. Of course, if they had made it proprietary, we would have had a different world, I guess. But
wasn't that because they were being sued for antitrust or they'd come out of an antitrust suit, and so they were being very careful not to provoke further scrutiny? I thought that was the reason.
I'm not sure exactly how much the antitrust, it had to have some effect. Antitrust suit would have been to inhibit them from making any move to inhibit us. And we were concerned. We always thought that any minute now they're going to lower the hammer on us, and we'll be all squashed, which never happened.
From what I've read about IBM in that period, they were very skittish after the antitrust suit, and it really stopped a lot of things internally. It really slowed them down on a lot of stuff.
I don't doubt that for a bit. The degree to which, I'm sure that opened space for the IBM PC, yes. From an outsider's perspective, I can say that.
Yeah.
In fact, they had a division called data something. The name included data. And this is it made things that became the IBM PC. They already had the monitor and the monochrome card, a few things like that, or the design of the card. Because when I took that design apart, I found stuff in there that had no function. It was clearly left over from a previous use.
I guess they were workstations, right? Like client server
workstation
terminals. Yeah. So I'm looking ahead now a little bit. Well, one thing is, so you're designing community memory. I guess this is what, the 4th version of it?
It will be.
And well, we've been talking obviously about the way the election went yesterday, and there's some concern about, like, people want to know how they can respond to the sort of, the world just changed, and what is the response to that? And the first thing that I thought of was effective online communities that are independent could be one part of a response to that. And I'm thinking about that really hard right now. And we have social media like Facebook and X and Mastodon and Blue Sky and all of these social media environments that to me are not community platforms. You can have conversations on them, but you don't really build community on them. So I'm kind of wondering how can we go forward, and how is community memory going to fit into the social media framework that we have now, and how can I assume it's going to be independent? It's not going to be like a corporate thing, right?
Right. You can assume that. It's going to be open source, and the design will be for a community-run system. I use the metaphor of public parks as for I guess, the economic structure of it. And somehow public parks get funded. Not very well, but still. What goes on in a public park and what is supposed to go on in a public park is really a kind of a remnant, but a significant remnant of, and I say that social media is the commons of information. Now, commons, as the plural is the same as the singular, all require management. The guy who wrote, the tragedy of the commons, Garrett Hardin, well, I've got a section in the book talking about the tragedy of Garrett Hardin. It simply applies capitalist economics and theory to commons, which predate capitalism by centuries, millennia. And he says they won't work because people are greedy and they're going to go glom all of the resources and spoil it all and so forth and so on. Well, that's what maybe he would do. And there are fisheries that are still running as commons, and they govern themselves and they've set quotas and so forth. And it works. And this can work. The system I envision will be owned by, it could be the polity, it could be public in that sense. It could be a public corporation or something, I don't know. But the point of it is it has to have roots in the people who use it. And it will also be populated by people. It won't use algorithms. It will use people as reference. And I said that's with the ENTS, people who are reference people. And there'll be other people who are journalists. And I can't take credit for that idea. That goes to a professor in Germany, Torkson. The book was Digital Fever. And he had come up with the point that what's missing in social media is journalism. And I had actually come up with a concept I called the inspectorate, which really was journalism, but I hadn't figured out that that's what it was. I couldn't name it. So you will subscribe to the system. The point of it is it has to have an economics. It's not going to come from an Elon Musk. And so you have your little account there, your debit account. And a few things will cost a little bit, it'll be micro payments. But one of the things we'll do with that is subscribe to hopefully several referents. The original term was gatekeepers, but that's got too much coercion involved in it. Who will they be there for you when you say, I don't know where to go for this or where to look. And the idea is they'll either have it in their mind or they'll be part of a network that can get it for you. Where to go, where to look, the secondary information, the pointer information. And that's going to make all the difference. And also it'll be multi-dimensional, i.e., rather than a single dimension, which is what the papyrus scroll is that you're using today, it'll be a book. And books are multidimensional. It'll be a magic book in that, you can go open, look at a line in a page and swipe it or something, and it'll open another page. And there'll be lines there, or there'll be full text or whatever. You'll be able to move through it in ways that you can't move through a paper book.
Are you familiar with the Fediverse?
I was just
No, I
about
think
to
I may
ask
have
the
heard it,
same
but I don't know
thing.
what it is.
Yeah, it's
It's like Mastodon, where you have federated servers that each has a local community, but they can communicate with all the other local communities. It's a little like the structure of Usenet, but more local interaction on servers, I think.
Well, that's
right.
the
And
sort of thing that I
Mastodon is just one app. Mastodon is just one
Right.
application that is on the Fediverse. Other applications use ActivityPub, and there can be interaction of different applications.
Well, I'm
Common
clearly
protocols.
going to have to investigate this, because it sounds as if that's the kind of back end that I was going to have to come up with anyway. And if I've
Yeah,
learned
I thought it
one
might be a
thing,
good fit.
yeah, if I've learned one thing in my engineering career, is don't reinvent stuff that other people
Yeah,
have done.
they've been working on stuff like this for a while. I think about 10, 15 years ago there was Diaspora, and Mastodon kind of grew out of some of those experiments, I think. But yes, as John says, the point is the protocol, which is ActivityPub. And one of the big questions in the Fediverse at the moment is what to do about Meta, which has started this thread service, which is going to which uses the same protocol. And the idea is that there's going to be a bridge. And then the question is, will threads overwhelm the Fediverse that we have, which is much smaller servers and many more of them?
Yeah, well, I kind of dread the prospect of having to learn all of that, which means I've got to find people who know it already or who are immersed in it. And, I'm grateful for this discussion, because it's advanced me away from having to think it all up myself. That's the way. I mean, I may have 10 years left, and I want to make sure to get this out fast.
Well, there's a movement called Indie Web, Independent Web Movement, and it's basically about building ways, giving people ways to build their own thing on the web without having to use some corporate environment like Facebook. So, the idea is to facilitate sharing from independent sources on the web. And I first heard of Mastodon when I was at an indie web camp. So Mastodon is not exactly an indie web application, but it's kind of related to that. So there are a lot of people who are thinking about ways to build independent networks that are not corporate or government connected, and those people tend to be focused on open source, and they tend to be very willing to share. So I don't think you'd have any trouble finding people who, could help you figure out the best way to, to like build your back end for this system, this version 4.
Or at least to specify it, and they can build it as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Important point is I'm not trying to be proprietary about this. And I'm very happy to hear that there's so much going on. I mean, the indie web sounds a little like D-Web. I don't know if you've encountered that, which is distributed web. And my late wife sent me to one of their meetings. And that's where I learned a great deal of what was going on. And I've been on their mailing list ever since, but never felt that I'm not software enough to really profit from it. But in fact, the important thing is the human interconnections and the people who know people. So this has already been a net profit for me.
Yeah,
Um,
I think your community focus is I mean, it's very profound, and you can see how it's the influence on community, the influence on people over technology throughout this history that we've been talking about, I think has been crucial to get us where we are now, even though, there has been exploitation. I mean, if you're Facebook, you see your users as the product and not as, as a community of users. They're a product in the sense that you're selling their attention to advertisers. So it would be great if we could give people a way to interact online that doesn't depend on being in that particular kind of environment.
and so you don't wind up being livestock in an information feedlot. A phrase you'll come across in my book.
I did come across that in your book. Your book is a fascinating read, by the way.
Remember, everybody, he said it first. Go
Right
buy it.
on, right on. Everybody should rush out and buy a copy of the book today.
It's at Amazon, unfortunately, Apple iBooks, and I just signed up with Ingram Spark, which is really just feed bookstores, but they'll sell individual hardback or not paperback copies.
So there's both ebook and paperback versions.
There is.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, we are really close to the end of our hour. And I'm wondering if you have anything to add that we haven't covered.
Well, the last page in the book is an advertisement for my merchandise. I have the Homebrew Club official T-shirt available through Zazzle, and I'm working on more. But other than that, to change the rules, change the tools. And a
Right
phrase I
on.
made up back in '74. It's going to be on one of the T-shirts, and that's relevant in the political situation. We got into this situation because through, I wanted not to say because of, but be through social media. Somebody, that's a good article for somebody to write. Those of you who
A
write
lot of
articles,
people are writing that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of focus on that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I actually think that that's to miss out. I mean, the far greater influence up until very recently. Fox News, the Daily Mail in this country, the Rupert Murdoch press,
the propaganda machine.
generally. I mean, Twitter, the bad behavior on Twitter is just a democratization of what the Daily Mail has done for decades.
Right. No, that's what I'm ranting about now online is the propaganda machine that has not been countered, as far as I can tell. There's no counter propaganda.
It's kind of a failure of moderation, but it's so difficult to do moderation at scale. And if you're building social media to be some sort of like huge monolithic platform with billions of users, then you're going to have a real challenge moderating that environment and making sure that toxic information doesn't leak into that environment.
And that's why I postulate a decentralized network structure for moderation.
Right. But
Yeah,
then you got to
and
figure out how to fund it. I mean, that's the other problem is the reason these massive social media platforms have succeeded is A, it enables people to connect to anybody they want, and B, advertisers love it. And so advertising pays for the social media. But if you're going to run something like Mastodon where there are no ads and everybody's running small, there's small to medium-sized servers, people have to be willing to make donations and pay for it. And that is, to me, one of the really big questions about whether it will be successful in the long run.
Well, there must be an economics for it.
Yeah.
And that's probably a major reason why we had to stop community memory in 1992, but there were other reasons. They're in the book. And people pay nickels and dimes. In other countries, that's other things. And we ought to be able to do it, put it that way. the money doesn't come first. The point I make in the book also, that is to say, the idea comes first, the vision comes first, and then people explore into that and find it attractive, and the money follows. Now, again, of course, I'm talking about the book. I point out that in social media, as soon as they got the first thing that made money for any of the social media platforms, that's where the development stopped. And it would then, any further development was directly in support of that. So you're not going to change the paradigm or whatever that got the money first coming in. And that's a great disadvantage. So, if you're completely impoverished, you have total freedom, which of course is ridiculous, but still, in a way,
Freedom's
it's
just
true.
another word for nothing left to lose.
Hey, that's a
There's
good line.
Christopherson.
Yeah, I know. We could all start singing that now.
May he rest in peace. Well, thanks, Lee. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope you'll come back sometime. I thought of other things I could have asked if we had more time, and maybe we can. Okay. Well, thanks.
I got on one podcast, and I went for 3 hours. I'm going to have to cut
It
it up.
wasn't Joe Rogan, was it?
I did.
Rogan does 3 and 4 hour interviews, and in the past, I don't know what he's like now because I haven't heard him since he joined Spotify. But some of his older interviews were actually really pretty interesting. He did a very long one with Lawrence Leslie, and another one with Bernie Sanders. He's done some really interesting.
Well, he can
But-
do it to me if he wants.
Our insight about that is that you can do a 3-hour podcast, but people will drop. They're not going to listen for 3 hours. So we try to chunk it at 1 hour at a time, and we like to have guests back. So we do hope you'll come back.
I think how long it is. I used to listen to it feels like
You have a lot of patience.
no,
yeah.
I'm
Talk for an hour.
It was how I was trying to get to sleep.
That'll do it.
I can help.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. You can stay in touch with Plutopia at plutopia.io. On Facebook, look for @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.